March 1943. The grey expanse of the Atlantic, a theatre of relentless attrition, churned under skies heavy with the promise of more storms, more grief. The long reach of submerged predators, steel sharks under the command of Grand Admiral, then Admiral Donitz, was at its apex. Allied vessels, desperately conveying resources and personnel, fell victim to the silent onslaught, the ocean floor becoming a graveyard of shattered hulls and lost hopes. 108 ships, a staggering toll, vanished beneath the waves that single month. The Allied strategists, gazing at charts marred by an ever-growing constellation of sinking icons, confronted a stark reality. The spectre of defeat loomed. Britain, lifeline strained to near breaking point, faced isolation, the very real possibility of succumbing to the choking grip of maritime blockade. The war, balanced precariously on the fulcrum of the Atlantic, threatened to tilt irrevocably in favour of the Axis powers. Yet, a mere 2 months hence, the narrative would undergo a seismic shift. The hunters would become the hunted. The submerged menace would find itself scrambling for survival, retreating in disarray from the very waters they had dominated. What confluence of events, what sudden reversal of fortune could explain this dramatic turnaround? From the opening salvos of 1939, these underwater craft, the sinews of German naval strategy, had posed a formidable challenge to Allied maritime supremacy. Though surface raiders played their part in the disruption of shipping lanes, it was Donitz's vision of a tonnage war, a relentless campaign to cripple British commerce, that truly threatened to strangle the island nation. The premise was simple, yet brutally effective. Sink enough merchant vessels, sever the arteries of supply, and Britain's military capabilities would wither, starved of the resources necessary to sustain the war effort. Or, more drastically, force London to its knees, compelling surrender through economic asphyxiation. Initially, the strategy bore bitter fruit. The summer of 1940, christened the Happy Time by German submariners, witnessed a massacre of merchantmen, isolated and vulnerable, easy prey for the stealthy U-boats. 471 vessels were lost, a hemorrhage that strained Britain's already dwindling reserves. With the United States' entry into the conflict in 1942, the situation deteriorated further. The second Happy Time, or even the American shooting season, saw the tally of sunken ships soar to an appalling 1,160, a testament to the U-boat's unchecked dominance. For Winston Churchill, the indomitable Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Atlantic theatre was the linchpin upon which all other fronts depended. By late 1942, it remained one of the few areas where Germany maintained a decisive offensive advantage. The figures spoke for themselves. In November alone, U-boats consigned 768,000 gross tons of Allied shipping to the depths, the peak of their destructive power throughout the entire war. Desperate, Churchill appealed to his allies for increased assistance, recognising that failure in the Atlantic would doom the entire Allied cause. He further, with a touch of characteristic rhetorical flourish, dictated new terminology to define the underwater struggle. Enemy submarines to be called U-boats, he declared. The term submarine is to be reserved for Allied underwater vessels. U-boats are those dastardly villains who sink our ships, while submarines are those gallant and noble craft which sink theirs. A subtle, yet powerful act of linguistic branding, designed to galvanise public opinion and demonise the enemy. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the Allied leadership, after much deliberation, made a crucial decision: prioritise the Atlantic campaign, delaying the planned invasion of continental Europe until 1944. Some commanders voiced their reservations, aware of the strategic implications, but others understood the fundamental truth. Attempting a cross-channel invasion with the U-boat threat unchecked was an exercise in futility, akin to constructing a bridge across a chasm while under constant bombardment. Promises of increased American support offered a glimmer of hope, yet formidable challenges remained. The Allied war effort, a sprawling, complex machine, was plagued by internal competition for resources. Materials, manpower, and equipment were stretched thin, creating friction and hindering coordination. Meanwhile, Dönitz commanded a U-boat fleet of unprecedented size. From a mere 39 vessels in 1939, his underwater armada had swelled to nearly 300 by early 1943, with more rolling off the assembly lines at an alarming rate. Furthermore, the resignation of Grand Admiral Erich Raeder as Navy Commander-in-Chief in January 1943 and Hitler's subsequent promotion of Dönitz to the position signalled a dramatic intensification of the U-boat campaign. Hitler, ever fixated on achieving decisive victories, urged Dönitz to maintain relentless pressure in the Atlantic. Yet, even with the Führer's unwavering support, Dönitz remained acutely aware of the formidable challenges ahead. In a sobering radio broadcast, he cautioned his crews, "The harsh realities of the submarine war means that even more difficult times lie ahead of us. A submariner now at the helm of the entire German Navy, the Allies braced themselves for an even more ferocious onslaught, anticipating new tactics, innovative technologies, and a renewed determination to sever the Atlantic lifeline." One particularly vulnerable area was the mid-Atlantic air gap, a vast expanse of ocean beyond the reach of land-based aircraft. Allied seamen grimly christened it Torpedo Junction, a haunting reminder of the ever-present danger lurking beneath the waves. By 1943, thanks in part to the rapid expansion of the Royal Canadian Navy, Allied warships could provide continuous escort to convoys, forming a protective screen against U-boat attacks. However, these escorts remained woefully inadequate in number, stretched thin across vast distances, and critically vulnerable without sustained air support. Air bases in the United Kingdom, Iceland, the United States, and Canada had gradually improved coverage, extending the reach of Allied air power. Yet, a significant gap persisted, a 1,000-kilometre void off the treacherous Cape Farewell, a haven for lurking U-boats. Allied commanders desperately sought to close this critical gap, employing various strategies and technologies. Escort carriers, often retrofitted civilian vessels, provided mobile air support, launching fighters and anti-submarine aircraft to patrol the convoy routes. Very long-range, VLR bombers, such as the B-24 Liberator, offered the promise of sustained patrols deep into the Atlantic, but their numbers remained severely limited. Until January 1943, British Coastal Command possessed a mere 6 VLR Liberators. The majority of these valuable aircraft were diverted to the strategic bombing campaign against Germany or deployed to the Pacific Theatre, leaving the Atlantic relatively undefended. Meanwhile, the German Navy's intelligence service, the Beobachtungsdienst, had achieved a significant breakthrough in December 1941. They had cracked the British Naval Cipher No. 3, gaining access to crucial Allied communications. By intercepting and decoding these messages, the Germans were able to organise coordinated wolf-pack attacks on convoys, concentrating their U-boats to overwhelm the escorts and inflict maximum damage. Intelligence estimates indicated that U-boats located approximately 70% of convoys thanks to this code-breaking coup, a staggering advantage that tilted the balance of power in their favour. Furthermore, Allied resources were further strained by Operation Torch, the landings in North Africa in 1942, and the subsequent battle for Tunisia in early 1943. The Royal Navy diverted 125 destroyers and other escort ships to support Torch, weakening the convoy escorts in the Atlantic. Fuel demands for the African operations also meant that North Atlantic convoys had less fuel available to manoeuvre and evade U-boat attacks, further increasing their vulnerability. The cumulative effect of these factors was a surge in shipping losses in early 1943. In March alone, German U-boats and surface ships sank 120 Allied ships globally, totaling 704,000 tons. A staggering 484,000 tons of this loss occurred in the Atlantic, underscoring the severity of the crisis. This rapid increase in tonnage sunk, a 74% increase over the previous month, triggered widespread alarm among Allied leaders. A British memorandum in March 1943 grimly stated, "There is insufficient shipping to allow us to develop the offensives against the enemy, which have been decided on. Every ship sunk makes the situation worse. We can no longer rely on evading the U-boat packs, and hence, we shall have to fight the convoys through them." The stark assessment painted a bleak picture, highlighting the precarious state of Allied shipping and the urgent need for a solution to the U-boat menace. A December 1943 Allied report went even further, suggesting that victory in the Atlantic, and therefore the entire war, was threatened, a dramatic pronouncement that underscored the gravity of the situation. However, more recent historical analysis has challenged the notion of a full-blown March crisis. While the losses were undoubtedly significant, the focus on two particularly devastating convoy battles, which accounted for 22 of the 90 merchant vessels sunk, may have skewed the overall perception. Overall, only 31% of March convoys were attacked, a figure significantly lower than the 52% attacked in November 1942. In fact, in the first quarter of 1943, shipping losses were lower than in any quarter of 1942. Crucially, the Allies were building more ships than they were losing, achieving a net gain of 2 million gross tons by March 1943, a testament to the industrial might of the United States. Perhaps most significantly, German sources offer no indication that March was perceived as a moment of imminent victory. In fact, within 2 months, the U-boats would be forced to withdraw from the Atlantic in defeat, a dramatic reversal of fortune that belies the narrative of an Allied crisis. Just as the March convoy battles raged, the Allies convened the Atlantic Convoy Conference, a crucial gathering to pool resources, standardize procedures, and formulate a unified strategy to combat the U-boat threat. The top priority was closing the mid-Atlantic air gap and taking the fight to the U-boats, actively hunting them rather than merely reacting to their attacks. The Commander-in-Chief of the Western Approaches, responsible for protecting the vital sea lanes around the British Isles, expressed cautious optimism. "I really have hopes now that we can turn from the defensive to another and better role, killing them." Early 1943 witnessed a convergence of tactical, technological, and military developments, all reaching fruition simultaneously. This confluence of factors would ultimately tip the balance in favour of the Allies and spell disaster for the U-boats. Ultra-intelligence, derived from the deciphered German Enigma code, is perhaps the most well-known tool available to the Allies. It provided invaluable insights into U-boat movements, patrol patterns, and attack plans. However, Ultra was not the sole, nor even necessarily the most important factor in the Allied victory. Ultra-intelligence provided a general location of most U-boats, which were meticulously tracked by the dedicated men and women in London's submarine tracking room. Convoys were then rerouted to avoid these concentrations, a highly effective tactic that saved countless ships and lives. However, ultra-intelligence was not without its limitations. The decryption process was often slow, sometimes taking up to 72 hours to decipher German communications. Furthermore, there were periodic blackouts when the Germans altered their Enigma settings, rendering the Allied codebreakers blind. The most significant of these occurred throughout much of 1942. As the number of U-boats at sea increased, the likelihood of evading them decreased, even with ultra-intelligence. While vital as a broader strategic tool, Ultra could not pinpoint U-boats preparing to attack, requiring additional technologies to provide tactical advantages in the heat of battle. By early 1943, a greater number of Allied escort vessels were equipped with improved sonar and radar equipment. Underwater ASDIC sonar, a system of active sonar, could detect submerged U-boats by emitting acoustic pulses and listening for the returning echoes, gauging range and bearing with increasing accuracy. This not only revealed the presence of approaching U-boats, but also allowed for more precise deployment of anti-submarine weapons, such as the Hedgehog and depth charges. Meanwhile, ships and aircraft equipped with the new 10-centimeter radar could detect U-boats on the surface, even in darkness or inclement weather, denying them the cover of darkness to stalk their prey. None of these technologies were perfect in isolation, each possessing its own limitations and vulnerabilities. However, when combined synergistically, they created a near impenetrable network of defences, significantly increasing the U-boat's risk of detection and destruction. A veteran Allied sailor described the process. The first indication of a U-boat attack would be from the Aztec people, who would pick up a contact. You could hear these pings, and the difference between the ping and the pong is the distance, how far the submarine is away. When they think they're right over the top of the submarine, the order is fire. That means the depth charges go. A colossal volume of water would come up. It was almost like lightning going across the water. In daytime, it's a fantastic thing to see. Anton Staller, a German submariner aboard U-188, experienced the terrifying reality of a depth charge attack in March 1943. Alarm bells shrilled loudly. Destroyer on the starboard bow, range about 5,000 meters. A quick glance at the manometer showed me that we were at 100 meters. At the same instant, for the first time, I heard ahead of us the roar of exploding depth charges. Now I discovered how appalling loud these sounded underwater. Though fearful, I concentrated on my hydrophone, wondering if I would ever hear anything again in my life. The psychological impact of these attacks, the constant threat of implosion under crushing pressure, took a heavy toll on U-boat crews, eroding morale and impairing their effectiveness. Another crucial Allied innovation was high frequency/direction finding, commonly known as HF/DF or HUF-DUF. This technology could detect German U-boat radio communications out to a range of 25 kilometers, close enough to pursue and attack. It significantly outranged surface radar and allowed escorts to proactively hunt down U-boats, rather than merely reacting to their attacks. The technology had existed since 1942, but its widespread deployment in 1943, with at least 2 HF/DF equipped ships per convoy, proved to be a game-changer. Coupled with these technological advances came more powerful anti-submarine weapons and improved organizational strategies. Previously, 6 escort vessels were considered adequate to protect 24 merchant ships. However, civilian experts, led by Professor P.M.S. Blackett, demonstrated that 8 escorts could effectively protect 48 merchant ships, a significant increase in efficiency. This allowed for the consolidation of smaller convoys into larger, more heavily defended formations, freeing up escorts to form mobile support groups, assisting convoys under attack and reinforcing vulnerable areas. Finally, the number of very long-range VLR bombers and escort carriers steadily increased. By May, Coastal Command boasted 49 VLR bombers, up from 17 in February. While still dwarfed by the hundreds of bombers targeting German industry, this number was sufficient to effectively close the mid-Atlantic air gap, denying the U-boats their favoured hunting grounds. Aircraft such as B-24 Liberators, Whitley bombers, and Sunderland and Catalina flying boats became vital submarine killers, accounting for approximately half of all U-boat losses. The combination of new tools and tactics proved devastating to the U-boat fleet. In April, the battle for the Atlantic reached a precarious equilibrium, with the Allies losing 39 merchantmen while sinking 15 U-boats. However, May 1943 marked a decisive turning point, a catastrophic month for the Kriegsmarine that would forever be remembered as Black May. The voyage of convoy SC-130, bound for Liverpool from Halifax, Nova Scotia, encapsulates the dramatic shift in fortunes. The convoy comprised 37 merchantmen and 8 escorts, several of which were equipped with high-frequency direction finding and the new 10-centimeter radar. German naval intelligence identified the convoy and gathered as many as 25 U-boats in 3 wolf packs to launch a coordinated attack. Donau 1 and 2 approached from the southeast, while Wolfpack Iller was already positioned in the area. The plan was to ambush the convoy in the air gap, exploiting its vulnerability to inflict maximum damage. However, British ultra-intelligence was aware of the planned attack. Tragically, a system failure prevented this crucial information from reaching the escort commander, leaving the convoy exposed. Despite this setback, the escorts acted proactively, sweeping the area for U-boats and disrupting their attack runs. The convoy also executed evasive maneuvers, making it difficult for the U-boats to achieve accurate torpedo shots. Soon, the battle moved within range of approaching Allied aircraft, which relentlessly harassed the U-boats, forcing them to submerge and disrupting their coordination. By May 21st, U-boat command abandoned the attack, admitting defeat. The Allies sank 3 U-boats and damaged another, suffering no losses of their own. On board one of the sunken U-boats, U-954, was Admiral Donitz's youngest son, Paul, who perished with the rest of his crew, a personal tragedy that underscored the brutal realities of the war. The battle for SC-130 was the culmination of a truly terrible month for the Kriegsmarine. In May, they lost a total of 41 U-boats, nearly 25% of their operational fleet. The scale of the losses was unprecedented, shattering morale and prompting widespread panic among U-boat crews. Captain Lieutenant Peter Erich Kremer at U-boat Staff Headquarters later recalled, "This May situation was quite out of hand. As I was soon to learn, the number of boats that failed to return from patrol reached more than 1 a day, and there was talk of Black May." On May 24th, Donitz issued a momentous order. All U-boats were to withdraw from the Atlantic until better equipment and countermeasures could be developed. The tonnage war had failed, and the U-boat fleet was being decimated. A temporary retreat was necessary to regroup, re-equip, and devise new strategies to counter the Allied onslaught. So, what factors contributed to this rapid and catastrophic reversal of fortune for the U-boats? Allied technological advancements and tactical innovations were undoubtedly significant, but German weaknesses also played a crucial role. Firstly, the Germans possessed poor intelligence on Allied capabilities, particularly high-frequency direction finding, radar, and Enigma decryption. As a result, U-boat crews were ill-equipped to avoid detection or counter these technologies, blithely sailing into carefully laid traps. Secondly, Donitz's top-down command structure, while effective in coordinating Wolfpack attacks, required frequent radio communications, especially before an attack. This provided British Ultra and HFDF operators with ample opportunities to locate and pinpoint U-boat positions. During the SC-130 battle, there were 104 HF/DF reports, allowing the Allies to track the U-boats with remarkable precision. Thirdly, the Kriegsmarine lacked reliable air cover. Donitz repeatedly requested greater support from Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe, but Göring, consumed by his own ambitions, resisted diverting resources away from his strategic bombing campaign. The lack of air cover left U-boats vulnerable to Allied aircraft, which proved to be deadly submarine killers. The increase in U-boat numbers did not translate into a proportionate increase in sinkings. While the sheer number of active U-boats still posed a significant threat, their individual performance and crew experience were declining rapidly. By April 1943, the average kill per U-boat at sea had sunk to 2,000 tons. This might be interesting as a sort of sporting score, but the number of U-boats operating had so greatly increased that it was of little significance in solving the problem. When Daniel Boone, who shot 50 bears a year, was replaced by 50 hunters who averaged 1 each, the Bears saw no occasion to celebrate the decline in human marksmanship. In 1940, U-boat commanders possessed, on average, 2 years of experience. By 1943, this had plummeted to a mere 8 months. Most U-boat captains killed in May 1943 had only 1 or 2 patrols to their names, lacking the seasoned expertise of their predecessors. In 1940, 2% of U-boat captains were responsible for 30% of all sinkings. The so-called aces had entered the Kriegsmarine before 1935, receiving extensive training and accumulating invaluable experience. By 1943, the veterans of the early war were largely gone, replaced by inexperienced and poorly trained officers. Roughly 850 U-boats, approximately 75% of the total built and crewed during the war, would never damage an Allied merchantman, a testament to the declining effectiveness of the U-boat campaign. In November 1940, the average tonnage sunk per U-boat per day was 430 tons. By January 1943, it had fallen to a paltry 65. From 1939 to early 1943, the Atlantic was the only theatre in which Germany successfully maintained the offensive, but now, even there, they were in retreat. Donitz's withdrawal was not intended to be permanent. He fast-tracked the development of new U-boat technologies and shifted back to smaller, more agile wolf packs. However, the U-boat wolf packs never made a meaningful return to their former dominance. Instead, the Atlantic became the logistical highway for the Allied invasion of Europe, the vital artery that sustained the liberation of the continent. 2 years after Black May for the German U-boat fleet, Admiral Donitz